Hello and welcome to Sunday School here at Second Baptist Church, where we're seeking to love God, love people, and serve the Lord. Hope you're having a blessed Sunday morning. Um, I am so far because the Lord has provided a lot and a lot too much. I guess my words aren't quite right yet, but to those who have, much will be expected. So hopefully today we can use the things the Lord has entrusted to us to spread His love and His message to those um, around the world and around our community. So that's our hope today. Hope God is working in your life and moving in mighty ways. I hope you're seeking Him. We are, as a church, working through 40 days of prayer. Hopefully, you're part of that. It's been posted on our Facebook every day, and then we have a prayer guide here if you want, if you're not into the digital. But we're on, I think, I forgot what day we are, 13 maybe. Today we talked about praying for spiritual growth. And that's the same thing. One way we grow in our spirit is to study the Word of God, what has been given to us and trusted into us, to to learn it and to use it as a tool to grow and refine ourselves, so that we can be following Jesus better every day. And that's one of those things we need to learn and know. Let's see. So, I just got a quick text. So, um, I need to. I can't have that. So, sad moments. Anyways, so that's part of live here. I need to. So, I don't want to respond to that real quick. Let me check that real quick. So, hopefully, you guys are enjoying life together in the Word, and pray that God is moving in a mighty way in that. So, all right, little distraction there, but we're back on task. Hopefully, you've enjoyed our study as we're going through the book of Luke. Luke is one of those great books. Is kind of opening. You really get the common feel in it and through it. And so, we got to get a hold of the idea that Luke is writing to those common people like us, who are seeking Jesus, or not. At that time, they weren't seeking Jesus; they're seeking God and wanting to grow in Him, but maybe a little bit different than uh, the normal Jewish people. And so, we see that from Luke, and Luke's trying to record a distinct narrative there from the eyewitnesses, and there's a lot of great stuff in that. Luke really identifies a lot of things, and um, so here's the thing. Today we're going to talk about neighbors, and we have a lot. Of, there's a lot of commands that Jesus has that are very hard to they're hard to swallow, really. So we talk about loving your enemies, right? When you love your enemies, it's just very hard to. It's a hard thing to do because they're your enemies, right? There's several other things. So we see that love your enemies, but then we see it put a different way, like love your neighbor. That seems a little more plausible, right? Um, Hopefully your neighbor is not your enemy, but when we get the idea there of loving other people, it's almost like a baby step forward. But then even then, when we start looking at what it means to love our neighbors, um, it's a whole nother thing. So when you're loving your neighbor as yourself, what does that mean in your life? What does that mean in all that you are, in all that you do? And so, we got a whole idea. So I'm a little distracted right now. Sorry about that. Uh, when you get a hold of this, as we dive into the next part of Luke, we got to get a hold of the idea that he's teaching in something called a parable, right? And parables are kind of our story that asks a question, or a kind of it sneaks up on you. I think the conversation is a you got pictures of a vehicle to ask a question that unsettles the listener, but it both reveals and conceals the message. So, parable is basically a story that has a meaning, and usually when you hear the parable, you're drawn into the story aspect, and it kind of covers the true meaning, but then reveals it as it pulls you in. And it's a fascinating story. And these things have been used, parables have been used as a vehicle for truth for many generations, many generations. And so we see that in this. We see that through many cultures, many ways, and we see that through Jesus' teaching. He uses parables to sneak in and to help people grasp a hold of truth and grasp a hold of what it means to follow through with truth. Because just stating truth, like laws, stating laws, those are hard to pout, those are hard to understand. But when you put it in the context of a story, it all of a sudden comes to life. And so we see that a lot with our laws and our statutes. In our country, we have several laws, and we have lawyers who fight over what those laws mean and how they're called out and how they work out. Because they're laws, they're very, very distinct in black and white. But if you put them in the scope of a story or a situation, you start to get the full depth of what they intended, what the meaning for them was. Anyways, so that's the thing we've got to get a hold of here. So that's the idea of parables. We're going to kind of dig into one of the more the well-known parables called the Good Samaritan. But we get a hold of, before we jump into that, we really need to get a hold of the idea of the context of this. And really the idea is we entering into the picture of the first century division of Jews, and they're living under oppression from Rome, and they are divided from their neighbors, the Samaritans and some Gentiles, and they were not very friendly with Samaritans. And like I said, if you've been with our previous studies, we talked about how when Judah and Israel split back under the divided kingdom, the northern kingdom eventually got conquered and perished. It came back and eventually became what we call Samaria. And so you have these division, like a division within the country already between the Jews and the Samaritans, because the Samaritans had defected basically from Israel to form their own nation. And so there's this half-blood that they intermarried, and there's a lot of animosity between the two groups, and so they were not very friendly. We talked about that when we studied the woman at the well. We hold that picture there that the Samaritans and the Jews were not very friendly there, and so there's a division there. And so not only that there was just divisions, hate. It was just outright didn't like each other. All right, so here we go. We're going to move on. We are in Luke chapter 10, verse 25. Luke chapter 10, verse 25. Luke chapter 10, verse 25. And so we're going to pick up, if you're with me, hopefully you're there. Here we go. We're going to pick up in verse number 25. And by the way, we're on a new curriculum book, so hopefully we're able to pick one of those up today. We're going to start our next journey as we finish Luke. But here we go. We're in Luke chapter 10, verse 25. It says this: Then an expert in the law stood up to test him, saying, Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He asked them. How do you read it? He answered, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And you yourself, you and your neighbor. Let's see. He said, Love the Lord. I need to go back to verse 27. And he said, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. You've answered correctly, he told him. Do this and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, Who is my neighbor? Wanting to test Jesus, we see this expert of the law who brings up this fair question, right? Because they're the place where the experts of the law and those who are coming against Jesus they're building their case and they're trying to find means to execute him, have him killed, have him run out. And so this expert of the law, and when we say law, we don't mean a lawyer, but this is a Bible scholar, as we would say, Old Testament scholar, who comes in, and he's an expert of the law, and he wants to know, how do you inherit eternal life? All right, how do you get that eternal life with God? And there's a fascinating thing there. So we see Jesus' answer, basically turns it back to him, because by this time we guess that Jesus has already taught this a couple times. And so one thing you get a hold when you're reading the Gospels is that the Gospels are not recording every single event that happened in the time of Jesus and during his ministry. I think John put it that if they did, the books of the world couldn't hold the volumes. So there's a lot that Jesus did and taught, and he taught several times, or he taught over, and it's not recorded in the Bible. And so we don't know if he's taught this before, and the lawyers heard it and just repeating it back a previous teaching, or if it's this guy's really just understood that much. But Jesus was really prodding him. And so we see this vehicle here. This is the vehicle. See this question and the way he's bringing it. There's a lot of stuff in there. He said the idea that, how can I inherit eternal life? How do I inherit? What do I do? Basically, what must I do is what it says. What are my actions that are required of me? And sometimes we put the burden of action upon ourselves to earn something, right? Because remember, the Jewish people were coming out of a system in which they had to do sacrifices and had to do certain things to earn their favor back with God, to wipe away those temporary sins, or the temporary sacrifices to wipe away their sins and to cover them. So there was always doing rituals and actions to make themselves right with God. And Jesus, of course, is bringing the new covenant, which is saying, look, it's not about sacrifices, it's about love and mercy and grace. And so we see the picture here where this guy's asking, what must I do? So he's stuck in that mindset. What do I have to do? And really it even comes even further. He says, but wanting to justify himself, he asks, who is my neighbor? You see this idea here that he's trying to justify his own hate. He's trying to justify what it means. How do I narrow the scope down? Who is my neighbor? Why is it problematic if everyone's my neighbor? Does it, and we get that sometimes too. We want to follow the rules and laws that align with our lives and are easy for us to accomplish and do. But those that bring us into conflict with our own thoughts and our own prejudice, we want to avoid those things. So a lot of us do that in our own lives. We want to avoid those things. And so basically he wants to justify himself in this, saying, look, I don't want to do it, And I love Jesus' response. He's always thinking, he's God, so of course he's thinking beyond. But the way he phrased it, he said, when the guy asked him, because Jesus could have explained the whole thing to him, how do I have eternal life? Was what do you do? But excuse me. Oh goodness, I'm not getting enough breaths in. That's what they say when you yawn, you're not breathing enough. It's a lack of oxygen. So anyways, we see that Jesus is prodding this guy to dig deeper in himself. So instead of answering the question himself, he says, well, what do you say? What do you know what's written, right? What is written in the law? How do you read it? And so he's prodding that guy just to spill forth the truth that is already inside of him, because it's there trying to get out, and the guy is fighting it. He's that there's a difference between knowing what is right and doing what is right. And this guy knows what's right, but he doesn't want to do it. He's struggling in his social norms and things he's stuck in. And Jesus pokes him at that too. You're an expert of the law. What do you think? You're the pro here, and do that. So Jesus' response, the guy quotes Leviticus or Deuteronomy 6:5 and Leviticus 19:18. You'll love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbors yourself. So that's where he goes to get this. And it's a fascinating thing, because sometimes we get all this idea of loving our neighbor, and we try and figure out like what is the limit to that? What are the boundaries to loving our neighbor? What is the most I have to do? What is the least I have to do? What do I have to do to fall into that range of loving? And I love how it's put. It's love your neighbor as yourself. And so we got to get this idea that the way we take care of ourselves, the way we live for ourselves, the way we take care of our bodies, we eat it, we nourish it. Paul talks about that. He says, you'd be crazy if you didn't feed your body. Those who don't feed your body are kind of, if you starve yourself to death, that's not a very sane thing to do. That's something that's going outside of the normal way of acting and being. And the same way with our spiritual life, we are to love other people as we have received love and as we love ourselves, right? When we come to Jesus for salvation, we love ourselves enough to know that we need God and be changed for that. And the same thing with our love for other people should be in the same way that they need God. They need the true nutrients that feed the soul, and that's something we need to get a hold of as we, are following the command of love others. It's the idea of love others as we love ourselves and as we take care of ourselves. And so that's kind of the grasp of idea there. Sometimes we try and find a way around it, or we have funny sayings, and we try and use them as excuses to not live out the truths within that. And we got to get a hold of that idea. So that's the heart searching thing. We need to get the idea. What does it mean to do this and live? What does it mean to do these things? Um, and I love it. I love it because near the end there, when Jesus responds, basically, the guy says, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says, look, do this and you'll live. Boom. That's all you got to do. Very simple way to put it, but the complexities that fall from that, the actions, it's very life changing. And really, it's not that complex. But when you try and get out of doing it, it becomes very complex, right? So it's like it's the way it goes. So that's a big thing. You got to think about this. So loving God is just surrendering it all to Him. Loving your neighbor is treating other people as God has treated you, has loved you, and taken care of you, and that really doesn't take much from you. When you look in the big picture, yes, maybe monetary comfort, you got physical comfort, maybe a little discomfort there, but it doesn't cost you anything to love your neighbor. It doesn't cost you to love God. You don't have to pay like $5 every time you come to to love God. Doesn't cost you any money. You don't got to say, hey, it's a $5 ticket to come love God. I got to buy a ticket to go love my. That's not how it is. You can love by surrender, love by giving, love by doing these things, and you don't go into debt for loving God. You don't go into debt for loving other people. Although Paul does say we need to live as if we have a debt of love to everyone. But that's it. It gets all the same idea that we are to live a life focus on love and focus on loving God. It's only going to cost you your self-centeredness. So, which is a big hurdle for many, and then they trying to work out the details, and like this gentleman here who's trying to find out, well, okay, love my neighbor, but who exactly is my neighbor? Because it's easy to love certain people if they're my neighbors. All right, so and we gotta get a whole lot. Just like this guy, we gotta put ourselves in his shoes, because yes, we're not blatant on as he is about who exactly his neighbor is, but are you willing to love the people around you as you love yourself? Are you willing to give those? We may not have we have somewhat of a racial divide in our country, but not as bad as then. And so for us to feel that, I think we need to get a hold of that idea that we struggle with those things too. Who's our neighbor, and how to love them, and how do we surrender to them? And so anyway, I think a bigger example would be definitely the political party divide in our country, which is very, very divided right now. So that might be another thing to think about. Love your neighbor. Can you love the other political party as yourself, even though they don't have the same views as you? So I'm gonna think about. All right, I'm meddling a little bit now, so be careful. All right. Let's see. I love this quote, and I'll probably put it in my sermon later today. But here's the thing: Jesus challenges the guy's the notion of the man who assumes he could determine who deserves love. Both rebellion and religion can be ways of running from God. And I love that phrase there. Rebellion and religion can be ways of running from God. Which means there's two basic ways to rebel from God. One is to outright just break his commands and just be against him in the way you live and everything. And the other type of way of rebelling and being against God is to form rules and laws so that it seems like you're doing his stuff, but you're being legalistic about certain things and ignoring other things. And so we get that picture here, of, well, who is my neighbor? He doesn't want to love his neighbor. He wants to be defined as who exactly is my neighbor. And the Jews at the time had all kinds of rules like this that kind of got him out of certain things. And Jesus calls him out a couple of times on this. This fact, and I don't want to go into those now, but just get that idea of that there's ways to make rules to sear your conscience and make you feel better while still ignoring the true command of God. And those are the two ways rebelling against God: either outright rebellion or making rules and laws that seem like you're doing His will, but you're not, and following His command, and you're not. And so that's what we got to get a hold of. We got to make sure that just because we're not outright rebelling, that we're not trying to make excuses around His commands and kind of make up rules and laws to buffer ourselves from actually doing His will and His word. Anyway, so that's something to think about. Roll in with that. Let's move on. We are picking up in verse 30. Verse 30 says this: Jesus took up the question and said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him, beat him, and fled, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down that road. When he saw him, he passed by the other side. In the same way, a Levite, when he arrived at the place and said to him, and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan on his journey came up to him, and when he saw the man, he had compassion. He went over to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on olive oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave it to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him. When I come back, I'll reimburse you for whatever extra you spend. All right, so we see this picture here. As he tells the story, we get this idea here of what does it mean to do something? What does it mean to love our neighbor? What does it mean to be moved into action? And Jesus knew the heart of this man, and he knew him enough to know where his line was at. Each one of us has a different line in our heart of where we can, where we can make excuses enough to get away with not following God's commands and laws. The big one for us is, struggled with for a while, but it was the idea, if someone hits you, you hit back. Someone does wrong to you, you do wrong back. I remember being around other Christian parents and them, teaching their kid, well, if someone wrongs you, you just wrong them back. You just, you don't want to get taken advantage of, is what they would say. But we were on the conviction, to reading Romans chapter 13, Romans 12, do not repay evil for evil. Instead repay for love. And so, we had conflict doing that early on, especially with children. You're trying to raise small children. And we had this group of some parents, and they're like, no, well, you don't want your kids to be taken advantage of, do this, so you got to do these certain things. And I even had someone go as far as say, well, Jesus flipped over tables, so it's okay for my son to punch somebody. I'm like, that's kind of a stretch there on the old Bible truth there. And so we get a hold of this idea that we got to stop making excuses for not doing God's word in his way. We try and buffer it because we think God, it doesn't fit in our situation or whatever. But here's the good example where Jesus goes straight to this guy's heart. And you have your own spots in your hearts and you need God to engage you through. So you got to go there. So anyways, to get this picture here, where do you draw the line? So we get this picture here where they're going down. The characters are going down from Jerusalem. Jerusalem's on a hill, by the way. You're going down out to Jericho, which is a windy path, and there's lots of little crevices, lots of places for people to hide and get mugged, basically, and get beaten. So, these people would have known that. This is not an uncommon area. It was most likely something that happened a lot. We have several characters in the story. We have a Levite and a priest. They were going through and they saw this guy who was just left, and they just kind of passed by. They just kind of avoided on the other side. Now there's speculation on, well, they didn't want to be unclean for the next worship, or they didn't want this, they didn't want that. That's not really the point of the story. The point of the story is they saw someone in need and they were not willing to do anything about it. They had excuses, I'm sure. The excuses don't matter. What matters is they saw a need and they avoided it. They went around. They crossed the road and went the other side. And that's the key to the story, because I know some commentators and people get it all bent out of shape about this and that, and arguments about whether they're be defiled for a certain amount of time, so they chose that because, well, that doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that they saw a need and they avoided it. They saw someone in need. They saw someone they could love and take care of, and they avoided it. That's the key. So there goes the Levite and the priest, who were the go-to people of the story. These are the Jewish, like, they're the A-team players, right? They're the religious elite. They're the ones that everyone viewed as closest to God. If anyone was like hanging out with Jesus or hanging out with God at the time, they didn't care about Jesus. But if anyone was hanging out buddies with God, it would have been the priests and the Levites. And that's how people saw them. And so to make them the failures in this story would have struck the hearts of the Jewish people listening, and this man listening, who was an expert of the law, who was up in that area, and that's his go-to people. And so we see that, and then Jesus flips it on its end and says, look, all right, well, and then a Samaritan, which is kind of like the hated people group. And so it's like, wow, that's kind of crazy that all of a sudden the people who were supposed to, those people were avoiding what they're supposed to do. And now the enemy, basically, the person who's disliked, the person who's on the other side, they are the ones coming to the rescue. All right. And so we see that, and they were so hated by the Jews. All right. And we see that, and you got to imagine this, because Jesus, and I say this a lot because it's fascinating how many times it actually comes true. Jesus is picking a fight here. He is going after this guy's bias. He is poking the bear, saying, look, and then the people you hate, the people you consider as unclean dogs, that's the person who shows up. That pagan person that you think are a disgrace to God, they show up. They show up. They show up with style. They come in. They are the hero of the day, the knight in shining armor. They come in and they make a difference, and it's an amazing thing to see and to happen. And so it's just fascinating. So we see that's the hero of the story is the exact enemies. All right. And you got to think this floored this guy. The idea of a good Samaritan was just like oxymoron. What? So anyways, we're picking up in verse 36. Verse 36 here says this: which of these do you think which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robber? The one who showed mercy to him, he said. Then Jesus said, go and do the same. Boom. So we see this picture here. I mean, he doesn't even say good neighbor. We always say the good Samaritan. But Jesus doesn't say. He says, look, which one of these guys proves to be a neighbor? Who proves to be that? Who proves? And the guy couldn't even say the Samaritan. He had to say the one who showed mercy, because it was so hard. It's so gut-wrenching to do. And see, here's the thing: we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the expert of the law, because a lot of us wants to put ourselves in the shoe of the good Samaritan. No, the whole story is for that guy who's the expert of the law to see that he has a bias that keeps him from following God. He has rules in his life that keep him from truly following God and God's laws. We've got to examine our own bias, examine our own hate, examine our own thoughts and what we do and why we do it, to see why, if we're doing the same thing, why do we believe that? Why do we hate that? Why is it so hard to love this person? Why is it so hard for this? Why do we do that? And so um, we've got to do that. We got to be able to examine ourselves and see why we do what we do and why it's hard for us to do certain things. That's a good example for us to examine our own lives. What is it hard for us to do? Who is it hard for us to talk to? Who is it hard for us to engage with, and why? Why do we do that? Because if we truly love God, we're going to seek out reasons to make sure we can love our neighbors as ourselves. That's part of growing in God. Like I said, um, today's prayer day was spiritual growth, and that's the thing. Part of spiritual growth is examining your bias and why you do what you do and see if it aligns with God. That's what it means to grow in your spirit. So weed out those things that pull you away from God and suck the nutrients of God out of your life. Um, we got to get a hold of that idea. And I love it because Jesus he didn't pull any punches, right? He already said, the guy says, what's the greatest commandment, Jesus? Or how do you have eternal life, Jesus? Jesus says, what does the law say? The guy tells him, love God, love your neighbor. And Jesus says, go and do it. All right. Do it and live. And it's echoing that. All right. Now, before that was the legal way of presenting it. Now Jesus presents it in a story. All right. This is what love looks like. Go and do it. Do it. You stop talking. Stop just thinking about it. You've got to be moved to action. That is what true obedience is. That is what true grace is lived out in your life. It's not a metaphor. It's not a idealistic thing. It is the way you live. Love is life lived, right? You've got to live it out or you don't really have it, right? Here's the thing. There's no such thing as complacency in love. You either love or you don't love. Complacency is passive hate. All right. You've got love is moved to action, or you're not loving. There's no in between. There's no in between. Complacency is just a fancy way to say being lazy and hate. And that's what we got to get a hold of these ideas. And that's what Jesus is saying. Look, you either love or you don't love. There's not like a pick or choose. It's either one or the other. So go and love, go and do, go and be. True faith is lived out, is life lived. True obedience is life lived. True love is life lived out. And that's what we've got to do. You'll be responsible for the way you lived your life because that shows what you truly believe and what you truly understand, all right? So that is kind of it's kind of a hard message there. Hopefully you guys are grasping this idea and grasping the fact that you are responsible for your life with Jesus and your obedience to him and your obedience to the truth. You can say it all you want, you can know it, but until you live it out, you don't truly believe it. All right. And so that's kind of the call for today. So I want to challenge you with that. Hopefully God is moving in your heart and help you to grow. Hopefully you got things you're dealing with that God will help you rearrange and work through. If we're all honest, we are all like the expert of the law who have bias and things that keep us from following God properly. You are required by God, if you want to glorify him in your life, is to examine those bias and work on laying them down. If you say you have no bias, then you are a fool because you are ignoring your bias. You're ignoring the things that separate you from him. And so we will not be perfect until we get to glory land. So we need to make sure we're examining those things, examining those aspects, examining what we're doing. And that's a fascinating thing that usually the people who are deep, the more, how you said, those who are spiritually deep, those who I've met that I'm like, wow, they're so deep. They're humble people who realize what it is that divides them from God and what that divides them from their neighbor. And usually those who are not very spiritual deep, those ones who say, well, I don't have any problems with my neighbor. I don't have any problem. They're in denial. And so let that be encouragement to you that as you see God, these things will be revealed and he'll encourage you to deal with them and make a difference in your life. All right. So that's my challenge for y'all today. Hopefully God continues to move in mighty ways in your life. Join us at 10:15. It's going to be a great time as we study in truth and freedom in Jesus, and we're going to move ahead with that. So God bless, and you have a wonderful day. See you at 10:15.